Hello there, and welcome back to my channel. As you can probably see, I am dressed a bit strange, I guess. So what I am currently wearing is a Viking tunic in very dark blue, indicating that I have a bit of money out there. It has a bit of embroidery around the cuffs as well, and around the collar, and that is to prevent the cuffs from fraying far too much. I am wearing a cloak and a penninula, which is a cloak fastener. It's a very bog standard one, you can get fancier versions than this. And in my hands I have my Viking sword, which is a replica of a Viking sword. Now I don't know whether I could use this in combat. I'm not too sure if it's battle ready or if I can actually, if it's just for display purposes. That I do not know. But you're probably wondering, why are you dressed like a Viking? I mean, you may look cool and everything, but why are you dressed like a Viking? To answer that, I'm going to tell you a little bit of a backstory about myself. So I used to work in a Viking museum, and I wanted today to talk about some of the stereotypical questions that you would get asked by members of the public, or just general things, or just stereotypical things in general that people just think. And I thought today I would share up to 10 of these things that I would get on the regular. So in this Viking museum I was dressed as a Viking, so I'd be up in the Viking get-up. It wasn't this one, this is completely my own, which I'm still building up. I still have a fair few things to get. But that being said, I would be in costume, and it was a very rewarding job, in all fairness. I was interacting with many people who were interested in the same things as me. Some of my best friends are actually who I met at that job, basically. But just like anybody else, working in a museum has its ups and its downs, and has some very interesting questions asked by the general public. And sometimes it can be a little alarming what the general public know as well. So one of the things that I have learnt from working in the heritage world is people's historical information tends to be quite blinkered. And I'm guilty of it myself. There's areas of history where my information is very blinkered as well. So it's understandable. But some of these blinkered ideas, people just kind of say all the time and don't really register why they say that. So, number one, I was dressed in a dress, because that is what females would wear. They would wear dresses, they would wear pinafores over the top, different names for it obviously. And one of the questions that we would get asked is, why are you showing your ankles? Because they didn't care about showing the ankles. Ankles weren't classed as a sexual feature until about the Victorian era. And this applies for pretty much any period. I'm sure there's many people out there that do reenactment and probably have had the same comments thrown at them, whether it be medieval or, I don't know, Georgian, any period sort of thing that isn't Victorian. You probably have a lot of people going, why are you showing off your ankles? This is a misconception from the Victorian period. In the Victorian era, they didn't sexify the breasts or the things that we sexify today. Instead, they sexified the ankles and the legs, and the more you showed off, the more risque you were. However, in the Viking period, this wasn't the case. If you showed off your ankles, big whoopie-doo. And even in the Victorian era, showing off your ankles wasn't that bad of a thing, really. It wasn't too taboo to do that, because obviously women would lift up their frocks in order to get into carriages, or step over puddles, or go upstairs sort of thing. So it wasn't completely unheard of that women would do this and show off their ankles. But yet it's one of those things that people seem to ask all the time is, why do you show off your ankles? Because quite frankly the Vikings did not care if you showed off your ankle. Number two. This is one of these things that historians have kind of accepted now, that people will always say this about the Vikings. So what is the first image that comes to your mind when you think of a Viking? Tell me in the comments what your first images in mind are. I'll give you a couple seconds. Let me guess. Big beards, big strong men, horns on the helmets. Yeah, this is a very stereotypical idea of what Vikings used to wear. Now, we have no archaeological evidence to prove that they wore horned helmets whatsoever. There has been the odd horned helmet found, but it was more for ceremonial purposes. It wasn't for everyday use, because to be frank, having horns on your helmets does not look scary at all. If you had some geezer coming up to you with horns on your helmets, you would stood there and be like, well, he's an idiot. Because you could drag them about, causes a lot of damage. It's not scary at all. Again, this idea has kind of come from the Victorian period again, when they started romanticising this idea of the Viking period, and you'd see a lot of paintings being made at this point where people would do artwork with the wearing horned helmets, and the same goes for like opera as well. You'd have people wearing horned helmets, and so the idea that Vikings wore horned helmets was then born. But other than that, they did not wear horned helmets. We have never found any horned helmets, or at least not from that period. So yeah, we'll just have to accept it, because people are never gonna accept the fact that they didn't do that. But yeah, just to clear the air, they did not wear horned helmets because they weren't stupid, basically. Number 3, to go on to that, they weren't stupid. A lot of people have this misconception. Now, this is not just for the Viking period, this tends to be overall the past in general. People have this misconception that people of the past were idiots. No, they weren't. They were not idiots. Not in the slightest. The difference is, from a modern perspective, yes, they may be seen as stupid or ignorant or uneducated. Yes, people of the past, only a select few people of the past would be learned in regards to books and words and all that sort of thing. Only a select few people would be interested in that sort of thing. When it came to people of the past in general, not just the Viking period, people were more skilled set rather than learned. If they looked at us, they would think that we were stupid because all we know, unless you are specialised in a skilled field, they would think that we were stupid because it is just books and learning and writing and stuff, and it's like, good for you, can you start a fire? Good for you, can you build a house? Good for you, can you work metalworking? And so on, and so on, and so on. So, in regards to people of the past being stupid, they really weren't. They are probably more knowledgeable than we are today. Think about it, if you go further back than the Viking period, they built the fucking pyramids. Those were the past civilization. They managed to suss out how to build a pyramid, and they did it, you know? So, no, people of the past were not stupid. Their level of knowledge was just different to what it is today. So no, they weren't stupid. Number 4. The Vikings came before the Romans. Maybe in the timeline that you were taught at school. But in actual history, no, they didn't. The Romans came, or at least the Roman Empire in Britain, was from 27 BC, 476 AD, and that is the Roman period. The Romans were here for a very long time, but no, they were here first. They left their mark in a lot of areas. A lot of the materials that the Vikings ended up using was reused from the Roman period. They would reuse stone, they would reuse various other materials that they could get their hands on. So basically what happened, or at least in the British Empire what happened, is you have the Romans. They came in, they defeated the Celts. You may have heard of Boudicca, or she's named under 2 different things for some reason. But you may have heard of the story of Boudicca, her fighting the Romans. Yeah, that was at the beginning. The Romans came, they took over, they were here for a very, very long time. Then we have the Anglo-Saxons coming in, and then the Vikings after that. One of the first accounts of the Vikings coming to Britain, or at least hitting Britain's monasteries, and most well-known monastery being Lindisfarne, is from 793. So yeah, the Vikings came after the Romans. And why people have this misconception that the Romans came after the Vikings, I can't really say. I can make a kind of guess. One is it was probably the way you were taught it in school in regards to the timeline being all hiddly-piddly. The other could be in regards to technology sort of thing. So people also have this misconception that just because Vikings did underground plumbing or underground heating and everything like that, that they weren't sophisticated, that they weren't, you know, skilled or anything like that. That because in fairness the sort of houses they were built mostly was made out of wood. They also made stuff out of stone, but what we tend to remember the most is they built things out of wood, whereas the Romans was all stone based, and Romans had cities, but so did the Vikings. So this idea that the Romans obviously must have come after the Vikings because they were more sophisticated is a bit backwards, really. Because the Romans, as much as they were sophisticated, they had gladiators. Vikings didn't have that. They didn't have that sort of shit, you know. So yeah, no, the Vikings definitely came after the Romans, and then after the Vikings was the Normans, and that's when we get our castle. Just throwing that in there. Speaking of underfloor heating, plumbing, bathhouses and stuff, the Vikings were unclean! No, Vikings were really not unclean. Not in the slightest. The Anglo-Saxons, on the other hand, yeah, they were a bit more unclean. I don't know what tends to happen. Obviously, we get different people coming in and invading the country, but it seems to be this whole idea of being clean and stuff that kind of goes out the window for some reason. But not when the Vikings come. The Vikings were very hygienic. They would have a bath once a week. They would use combs to brush their hair, to get rid of nits and lice. They would wash their clothes. They would change their clothes. They were very vain individuals. If you see a Viking with long flowy hair and a big massive beard, he knows how to look after himself. Because if you did not want to look after yourself, you'd shave it off. That's what they did with their slaves. They shaved off their hair so they wouldn't have to bother with the lice. Whereas with Vikings themselves, as we see, the stereotypical idea is big, muscular guys with massive beards, massive hair, everything. They were very vain. they were quite vain individuals, and they would use combs, and they would use they would have little sets and stuff. Sort of like this image here, really. This is a little grooming set, so you'd have tools to use under your nails to get rid of all the dirt. You'd have an ear scoop to get rid of all the wax. So yeah, the Vikings were actually very hygienic individuals indeed. Vikings hated Christians. No. Maybe some of them. Not all of them. In actual fact, when the Vikings came to Britain and colonised the area, a lot of them adopted Christianity very, very quickly. To begin with, it would start off with, oh, your god is very similar to our gods, might as well just add him to ours, and then as time went on, they then fully converted to Christianity. So no, they didn't really hate on Christians at all. I don't think they even gave a damn about people's faiths. They believed in their own thing, you believe in your own thing. It doesn't really faze them. The reason why they would hit the monasteries is because monasteries are basically like the banks. That's where all the shiny stuff is. If you want shiny stuff, that's where you go. So no, there's no real evidence as such that they hated on Christians, because otherwise why would they adopted Christianity, you know? So no, they didn't hate Christians. Speaking of which, hitting the monasteries and everything like that, to be a Viking is to be a pirate. Just throwing that out there. So yeah, there has been some understanding, a bit of translation into some of the words of Vikingia, where to go Viking was to go pirate. So people who say that if you have a family of 5 sons, the younger you are, the less land or money or anything like that you're going to get, unless you're your family member's favourite. But other than that, you're not really going to have much when your parents have died. So in order to make a name for yourself, you would then go off, you would raid places, you would get loads of materials, you would get slaves, anything you could use to sell to basically get money and make a name for yourself, so you could then have lands, have a family and all that sort of thing yourself. Another interesting, now I don't fully understand this one, but another interesting concept. One of the things I got asked, I dyed my hair red at one point when I was working in this museum, so I wasn't a natural redhead. But that aside, I still did get asked by people, are you Irish? No, I am English. And if anything, being a redhead kinda is associated with Vikings, pretty much associated with the Scots. It is associated with the Irish as well, but it was a very interesting question that I would get asked, are you Irish? No, I am English. But one of the things, and I've actually done the research for this one, is apparently 10% of Irish people are red, and there is a ginger gene, which is known as MC1R, and apparently a large percentage of Irish people actually have that gene. But why people would think that a female Viking with red hair would be Irish, I do not know. What we have known from archaeological evidence is when you go to Iceland and Greenland that the skeletons of the males tended to be Scandinavian, whereas the skeletons of the females tended to be Irish and English and Scottish, indicating that they've come to this place, gotten a wife, taken them off. But that aside, thinking that I'm Irish just because I have red hair is an interesting one. And the reason why it's interesting as well is because I had a friend, a male friend, with red hair, very stereotypical looking Viking, And he never got asked that question. Never. Ever. He's never been asked that. It only seems to be if you're female that they ask if you're Irish. So, food for thought. It's a very interesting thing. Another question as well, or misconception that people have, is people tend to get shocked that there was female Vikings. People tended to be shocked if you were a Viking of a different colour, a different race sort of thing. People are very shocked by this notion. Why? I do not know. So, for starters, I will go with the female thing for starters. Of course they had female Vikings. Of course that was the thing. Because how else are they going to survive? How are they going to populate? Of course there is going to be female Vikings. You know? I don't understand the concept as to why they would not have female Vikings, but people seem to think this. And in regards to being of a different race, again, it doesn't matter. Your colour, your race, your whatever, does not matter. It doesn't stop you from being a Viking. The whole concept of being a Viking is being a pirate, sort of thing. Granted, it's more focused on the Scandinavian concept sort of thing, but they did travel. So you would travel, people would come with you, some people would go to your place, you would go with them, so it was a very connected area. So from that period, of course you had people that were from different areas and they would have been Viking, regardless. We need to get rid of this notion that people of different races just magically appeared one day, because that is not the case at all. Now to get onto the more darker sides of the Viking period. So, one of the things that people will say to you, and if you are working in a Viking museum, especially if you're in costume, one of the most alarming things that people say to you, and they don't seem to register what they've actually said, is rape and pillage. They will just casually go, rape and pillage. You're a Viking, so you must rape and pillage. I remember an old lady going, it's a good day for rape and pillage, isn't it? It's just like, yes, totally, sort of thing, you know. Rape and pillage is not a good thing. It's not something to be proud of, it's not something to promote, it's not a good thing whatsoever. It's just not. But it baffles me how casually people will say if you are a Viking or if you are representing a Viking, dressed like a Viking sort of thing. People so casually say it, they don't seem to register the words, and obviously if you're in customer service you can't just go, think about what you've just said. Seriously, think about what you just said. You can't say it, you kind of just go, Or you can debunk it and go, no, because I am a civilian, I am an everyday person, that is not what I would do, sort of thing. Like, another misconception is, a lot of people would look at a female Viking, female Vikings, so assume they believe that women Viking were a thing, they would go, oh, so you're a Viking wench, are you? Again, not really registering what the word wench means. Wench means whore. It is an old term for whore. And it's just not what they, maybe some were, can't paint everybody with the same brush, but not everybody was a whore. They were just Viking women doing Viking women-y things, you know. So terminology is an interesting thing that people just throw at you, don't really think about it, and it's just baffling, very worrying when people say that sort of stuff, because if you turned round to people like that and go, it's a good old day for your other half to rape, isn't it? Sort of thing. They'll be like, what? How dare you? Be really offended. It's like, register what you said. Plus, the whole idea of rape and pillage just being a Viking thing, I find that very baffling in itself, because every single society that has ever taken over a place, it's not exclusively to the Viking period, but for some reason it kind of has been exclusively put with the Vikings. It's like you don't go to the Roman period and go, Romans, they raped and pillaged, even though they did. Anglo-Saxons, they raped and pillaged. Yes, they did. And it's still something that goes on today, believe it or not. You know, so it is a weird thing that that is associated with just Vikings. That Vikings just came along and they raped and they pillaged. They had laws, they had rules in place as to whether you were allowed to do that sort of thing, whether you should do that sort of thing. So it's a very strange thing that just for the Vikings it kind of goes, you raped and pillaged, and it's a bit unsettling, to say the least. Another unsettling thing as well, but this kind of goes with the blinkered history, like the idea that women were not allowed to show their ankles, is in this said museum we have a male Viking who is of African descent, and we can tell this by the facial features and the body sort of thing, because skeletons are amazing things. I love skeletons, I can tell you so much. And I remember having this one question from somebody that was like, were they a slave? Again, it's very blinkered, very limited history knowledge. There was nothing to suggest that that individual had been a slave at all. He had just been a Viking, a gentleman, a Viking gentleman. That is literally all he was. He has African descent, but he himself was born and raised in the UK, so it indicates that his family members may have come over from Africa, probably travelled over, maybe they were doing some trading or something like that. There's nothing to suggest that he was a slave. So yeah, it's a bit of a limited information, very blinkered historical information, because slaves were a thing. They did have slaves. Slavery is a thing that's been happening since the dawn of time till up to recently, actually. It's still something that's going on regardless. They did have slaves, but whether they focused on people purely for the colour of their skin, no, not really. It would be more anybody. Anybody was fair game, basically. If you were going to be a slave, you were going to be a slave. Regardless, it didn't matter. So, yeah, that's just some of the things. Some of the things. So yeah, that's just some of the misconceptions or some of the questions that people would ask about the Viking period. Some of it's very baffling as to why people think like that. Some of it, you kind of understand it, it's very blinkered information or it's very limited information. And some of it you just got to question why people don't register what they're actually saying when it comes to it. Yeah. But as we know, the Viking period were actually a very interesting period in history. They were very avid sailors, they were very skilled in shipmaking and various other things such as metalworking. They had beautiful artwork of twisting metal, similar to like the Celtic artwork. They actually were very skilled in a lot of things. They were skilled in warfare as well. There's loads of ideas floating around with the Viking period, but because hardly anything was written at the time, the only things that tended to be written were people that interacted with them, so it would be kind of biased or it'd be very limited. But for the Vikings themselves, they didn't tend to write down all that much. It was more of a word of mouth sort of thing. You pass the stories on, and a lot of the stories that we do have of that time tended to be written about over 100 years or so after the fact. So in regards to the Viking period, a lot of the information we're trying to get is from the archaeology that we find. Some of it is from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, but again, it's very biased. These people have come in, obviously, they've taken your land, so of course you're going to go, these people are blah 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 blah, sort of thing. You're going to be quite negative towards these invaders, as it were. But the Vikings themselves were very good at colonising. They were able to, they were very good at mixing in with the locals, becoming one of the locals, becoming part of society. They had their own rules, they had their own laws, they had their own things in place, they had their own currency, they had their own king, so they were a very sophisticated, they had a very sophisticated culture. They were, it was more, it's very interesting to think that it was very disorganised and stuff, but it wasn't. It was very organised. It may not have been Roman organised, but it was still organised. They had their own way of doing things, just like any society does. But yeah, so there we have it, guys. Those are just some of the things that people have asked me while working in a museum. If you've ever worked in a museum or if you do reenactment, please let me know down below what sort of things people have asked you about in regards to the period that you specialise in or the period that you reenact in. Please let me know in the comments down below. This was just some of my experiences. I would love to hear yours as well. Sorry it went a bit dark at the end, but unfortunately it's still some of the things that people do ask. But yeah, let me know down below in the comments if you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you are part of anything history based, working in a museum, being part of reenactments. Let me know your funny stories about sort of things that people would ask. I would love to hear them, and I will see you again in another video very soon. Thank you for watching.